bottom line is my sister was married to Kim Henkel. I was doing a children's play in Chicago at the Goodman Theater. 2 shows a day, 6 days a week, for $75 a week, clear. Which comes down to like $12.50 a show or something. And Kim called me up and said I had met him once, at the wedding, and I had met him another time. Didn't know him that well. And called and said that he had written a film and they were doing it, and he thought there was a part in it for me and could have come down. I immediately that afternoon went down and quit the play and made arrangements to go to Texas. Cat. And I remember going to Dr. Bella Itkin. She was a Russian woman who was the producer of this children's show, to go down and give my 2 weeks' notice. And she asked me what the film was. I told her, and she asked me what the part was, and I said it was a heavy makeup role. And she had this Russian accent, which I can't do. And she also had like one eye that went off weird, and there was always sort of a little something running out of it over here. And she said, Roddy McDowall would have never done Planet of the Apes if he hadn't been an established actor first. That's what she said to me. I said, fine, I'm giving my notice anyway, and I went to Texas.
You act like a pack of hounds. We were just having fun. You think this is a party?
I was doing a show, we were doing a movie up in Columbus called The Wind Splitter, which I had a part in. I was the father of the young hippie that went to California and came back, and the town hated him because he had long hair. So there were 3 roughnecks in it, and one of them was Tobe Hooper. He was in the movie. And the movie came out, and it didn't go very far. I got a call one day from Tobe Hooper in Austin. He said he was in the, I didn't even remember him. He said he was going to do a movie, and would I like to be in it? And this was Chainsaw.
I thought you was in a hurry.
And we got back to UT, and it's late for a class. And they were tearing into the building, and they said, hey, where are you guys going? You gonna try out for the movie? And we said, what movie? What are you talking about? And they said, well, they're shooting this movie. I said, where? And they said, in that room right there. It was one of the main theaters at the UT Drama Department. And we said, sure, like they're really gonna make a movie here with us. Sure, you bet. And so we poked our head in the door, and somebody said, are you here to read for the movie? And it was Tobe Hooper. And we said, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, the movie. Sure, yeah. So he said, come on in. And he said, he looked at me and he said, took his little cigar out, said, can you be weird? And I said, weird is what I do. And my friend said, oh, yeah, he gives good weird. So they said, okay, get up and be weird. So they handed me the script, and it had one of the little scenes from the hitchhiker in there. And the minute that I began to read the dialogue, I knew this was my nephew. I have a brain-damaged, paranoid schizophrenic nephew, and this is the way he talks. And I said, my God, it's Paul, my nephew. I said, I can do this. So I did Paul, my nephew, and Toby took his little cigar out. Wow, that's great, that's great, that's great. So then they called me back a couple days later and said, well, you're doing some real interesting things there. You want to make this movie or what? I said, well, why not?
The summer that they started shooting, I had in fact run into a guy who'd played in Of Mice and Men with me. And that's how I got involved with Chainsaw, was that we went in to have a cup of coffee in a drugstore, and this guy who was a friend of his saw him and came over and joined the conversation. And then told me about this movie they were shooting and that they were still casting for the killer. I called the casting director, who was Bob Burns, doubling as casting director in addition to doing his the effects. And I went down and met him and talked to him for a while. And then what happened was he just said that he'd call me. They had other people to talk to, and so I figured that was that. They weren't going to call me. And about 2 days later, he called me and said he wanted me to come down the next day to meet the director and the writer. So I went down and met Toby and Kim, And they asked me, you know, I came in and they told me what the movie was and what the character was about, and asked me if I was violent. And I said no, and then they asked me if I was crazy, and I said no. And then he said, well, can you do it? And I said, sure, it sounds really easy. So they said, okay, you got the part. And then 2 nights later, we had a cast meeting, and I signed the contract. And that when I signed the contract, Toby told me that he'd actually decided he wanted me when I came in the door because I'd filled the door.
I was told, and I don't know if it was Toby as much, and Kim Henkel was, I don't know if he was credited for it, but at the time he was co-director, co-writer of the film, at least when we were working on it. I don't know how it's credited, but somebody told me they were looking for an embryonic old man, somebody who sold they'd reversed the cycle and they were, you know, an embryo. And the other specific direction I remember getting is during the finger-sucking scene with Marilyn. One of them, either Kim or Toby, saying, have you ever seen Child Nurse before? You know how when they get excited, they start, you know, could you try, you know, maybe try that.
I think he wanted to leave one halfway sane person in it to get the thing across and to keep it from being complete mayhem in there.
What are you doing?
You don't need to worry.
No!
No, you just cooperate, young lady, and we'll have no trouble.
When we first started that scene, not the scene in the truck, but the one in the barbecue shack where I'm beating Marilyn up with the club, that was hard. We started out, I couldn't do it. And they'd keep telling me to make it look real, hit her, and they couldn't use anything fake because that looked fake. So I'd start and, no, you gotta hit her harder, hit her some more. Marilyn would say, hit me, don't worry about it, you know. Of course, here I am, every time we try it, she'd come out with a few more.
The Hitchhiker is one of the, you know, one of the wackier members of the family. He's they're in left field. He's in the outskirts of left field. He's further afield than they are. He was always envisioned as the one that was, you know, the furthest that could go. You know, like if the family had been inbreeding, he's like 2 generations of inbreeding rather than 1. You know, like Leatherface is probably 1. You know, but the Hitchhiker's probably 2. You know? He's his father's, and you know, his father's father is probably his father. You know, we're not real sure where he came from. He has this weird birthmark. You know, what the heck's that all about?
Come here, you nap-haired idiot!
No!
Where are you been?
I've been out on the road.
You damn fool, you almost got caught over a dude.
No, they didn't see me. They don't know nothing.
I told you to stay away from that graveyard.
The scene where Seadow is chasing me in front of the truck and the artsy-fartsy lights behind and all of the smoke coming up, it's not even smoke, it's dirt. I mean, it's, you know, in LA they would be on a sound stage and they'd have just the right amount of smoke. Well, this really works because it's all natural elements here. You know, it says I'm groveling in the dirt. The reason I'm groveling and trying to get down into the dirt is because the stick that Seadow was punching me with was made out of hardwood. And he was beating me, like, you know, and I could hear my skull cracking inside my head. And I'm going, ah! And Hooper's over the cycle. That's great, that's great stuff. Give me some more of that. I said, and you know, in between takes, I'm going, Mr. Hooper, I think, you know, my ear is bleeding because this is like a hardwood thing. Like balsa would be good to do. We can dub the sound. No, let me see. And he would walk over and he would hit his hand with it. Nah, it's okay. I said, no, hit yourself on the head with it, creep. That's where it hurts in your head, it hurts. You know, and so we finished the scene. We did like 3 or 4 takes with this hardwood stick. But what bothers me about that is to have gone through all this pain and then virtually have this thing in black and white, you know, where you couldn't, you know, you don't see any of this, you know. There's no great close-ups of this hardwood stick.
Originally, we had planned to have the character speak at least some sort of gibberish that had some meaning. So we had gone through the character, through the lines, so that I knew what the meaning was supposed to be. And of each time, the lines each time that Leatherface tried to speak. And when we did it the first time, Toby stopped that and said, no, that was too rational, that Leatherface wasn't that verbal. He couldn't talk. And so we cut all that out because of Toby's perception of what Leatherface was like. So he really defined Leatherface in a lot of ways. I think the way I defined him for myself was that in preparing for the part, I went to the Austin State School, which is a large campus for retarded persons. And I spent several days walking around the campus pretending I was a student there, or an inmate, and trying to pick up the physical mannerisms of the way some people walked. I didn't think there was really anything else I could do, because obviously the character really doesn't have many lines and is there really only as a physical presence. I thought that was really the only way I was going to be able to define the character in any way. So I spent enough time there to try to learn how to walk a certain way that I felt in some way presented this sort of mental state of this guy. And I went to a friend's farm for a while and watched his pigs and tried to get him to squeal. Since I was supposed to squeal like a pig, I never did. I never could figure out a way to do it. So the squeals and grunts that you hear at the early on is really just, it's dubbed in. It's not me at all. The only sound I make is that sort of groaning scream there when I killed Kirk.
Oh God, the infamous dinner scene, Lord. The dinner scene stands out in my mind as probably the most intense, the most incredible, fantastically creative, labored, pregnant, it's all of these words rolled into one. I mean, here was this table, right? And all of this action going around and around this table, which took like 30-something hours to shoot, with the same group of people, and here was this table with this sausage that had been on this plate for 2.5 weeks for continuity purposes. It couldn't be moved off. And they had these lights at about 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit shining down on this stuff, and the stuff is decomposing in front of your eyes, like 4 inches from your nose, right? And here's a guy off stage with formaldehyde, literally, formaldehyde, putting formaldehyde in the sausage, trying to keep it from exploding on the set. And then there's this chicken head, right? Like Burns had this great idea. He takes this chicken head, he cuts the head off the chicken, nails it to a board, right? And then he nails the feet to the board and made a little chicken out of it. Looks great, but that sucker was just, rotting right in front of you, man. And we were all sitting there, he said, don't do that on camera. We can see you on camera wrinkling your nose. Wrinkling my nose, I'm about to projectile vomit all the way to Peoria. Come on, what are we talking about? But they had things over the window to keep the light out because, because the light outside is going up and down because we're there over almost going into the second day, so we got a few light changes here, different times of the day. So they got these black things over the windows. And there's no air. It's an old German farmhouse built in the 20s, and there's no ventilation whatsoever. Everybody's puking and pissing and moaning, and we're going, we're never going to be done. It's going to go on into infinity. And this is, because a lot of these people, couldn't see the end of the tunnel, man. They didn't even remember anymore how they got onto the damn track.
The heat was oppressive. It was awful. So I guess we're shooting day for night or whatever. So it was supposed to be nighttime, but actually we were shooting around the clock at that point. But it was hot, and with the lights it was even hotter, and all the meat that was on the table. And the dinner sequence started sweating and cooking, and the flies, and the smell in the place was unbelievable, with all the bones in the front room, which was right off the dining room there. And with the heat, and there was this mangy chicken they had in a bird, like a parakeet cage. They had a chicken stuffed in there. The smell was awful. Gunnar smelled awful. I probably smelled bad. The smell was just overwhelming.
They ran long, long hours, and especially the last day we shot that last series. That thing ran 26 hours from the time we started till the time we quit. That was that dinner table scene. Ugh. That was rough. And they had all those meats and stuff, and the skeletons wired with the light bulbs. Well, first the skeletons started burning from the hot light bulb in it. And if you think that's a bad smell, ooh, it's terrible. And then toward had all this, and it was hot up there, just hot as the devil. And they had all these meats, cold meats and stuff they started going bad and smelling. And that was, people ran outside and had to go out and regurgitate and come back in. And it was a little hairy there for a while.
I mean, I don't know how we particularly got pumped up for it. I remember it as the hardest scene to shoot because it was part of that 26-hour shooting session. And we had to shoot that long because Grandpa, we had only 3 faces for him. So we had to shoot everything with him in it in 3 sessions, and that was it. So we had to do that dinner scene that day. It was a real long scene to shoot because it was a long scene, particularly as we originally had. I mean, I think it's something like 5 minutes long, and we had to shoot enough angles on it, and we had to match the shots close enough that we had a lot of takes. We actually shot the movie, I think, in a pretty low ratio, but that scene, I think the ratio was higher because we had to get it exactly right each time, and then we had to time it out well each time. I think it was easy to get into the spirit of it because it was daylight outside at that point, so we were now probably 18 hours into shooting. It was something like 105 degrees outside. With the windows covered, we had blankets over the windows to make sure there was no daylight coming in, and we had all the lighting in there, and the entire crew in there. You know, it had to be 115 degrees in that room or hotter, and the food was rotting fast. We had to keep changing the head cheese because it would start to turn right away. I mean, you know, an hour into shooting and it was smelling so bad we had to switch it out. And so I think it was very easy for the scene to be very intense because we were all overheated and we all smelled bad, and you know, and the food smelled awful, and you know, and probably nobody liked each other at that point anymore, you know. So it was easy to squabble and fight. And well, as I said, you know, that was the scene where I finally sort of forgot myself and got very involved with killing Sally. I mean, I had that moment when Ed is yelling, "Kill her, kill the bitch," and where I'm thinking, yeah, you know, let's get her, let's get this over with.
Hit her! Hit that bitch!
It was like its own major amphetamine, you know. It just got crazier and crazier and crazier. You know, you're sitting here at 4 o'clock in the morning talking about hitting people in the head with hammers. What's the best way we can depict the hammer coming down the back of the head? I mean, these are grown men sitting in a room discussing this like it was some kind of, you know, scientific tenet that they're working on here. You know, where we should have the hammer. Well, what angle are we going to have that it's going to fall into the bucket just right? Grown men sitting in a room talking about hitting a woman in the back of the head with a steel hammer. And people sitting calmly going, yes, I think that'd work. Unreal.
Actually, until we got into that dinner sequence, I don't think anybody involved knew that I was even in the film, or very few people. I roomed with Lou Perryman, he was now Lou Perry, who was the assistant director or second camera, maybe, on the film. We roomed together in Austin. When he found out he was rooming with me, he said, "Oh, you're in this film?" Because they hadn't started shooting my scenes yet. Because I'd been out on the set and I was running errands for Toby, picking up props and things. And he said, "I thought you were just a little observer."
It was fun. It's a lot of fun to run around like that. Not just let yourself go and do that. It really was.
Leatherface has 3 faces. For the dinner scene, he put on what we called the pretty woman face. And I think the idea was that he was all dressed up, and this was a big dinner party, so he was going to, you know, be on his best behavior. You know, he'd taken Grandma's apron off. He wasn't in his domestic role anymore, and so he wasn't playing Grandma anymore. And he puts on the pretty woman face. In that very long dinner scene, when they're getting ready to kill Sally, what happens is, and what was cut out, was that Leatherface gets up during a lot of that fussing around the table and wanders into the neighboring room and puts on makeup. And there's a shot where the face is already made up, but he starts really slathering on the lipstick and the rouge and stuff. And I think you can tell if you look at the face the first time you see it and then look at it later when he's running out the door that there's a lot more lipstick and rouge on the face than there was at the beginning. And I guess the idea was that Leatherface is so that he almost takes on the personality of the face that he's wearing. You know, that's whatever personality Leatherface has is whatever mask he happens to have on. And the idea was that he was going to be, you know, all primped up for dinner, you know, and they were having guests for dinner.
There was one particular scene that was perhaps one of the most difficult scenes to shoot in the film, which was cut. The hitchhiker has been run over by this massive, huge 18-wheeler truck, and he's been tossed unceremoniously about 50 feet in the air and flop down on the side of the hot Texas road, lying there in a heap. Well, in shooting the scene, there they were. They had me lying on this. You ever seen these things on the CNN where they, you know, and here today in Peoria, and they take the egg and they dump it out of the glass on the sidewalk and it starts to cook and everybody gathers around and says, wow, the egg is actually cooking, you know, because the asphalt is so hot. Lying on the asphalt, I could hear in my ear, which was right next to the asphalt, right next to the skin, I could hear my own skin cooking. But being very young at the time and not having the sense to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, my skin's cooking here. Being a young actor and trying to do the right thing and keep the production going, I lay there on this asphalt until my skin cooked. Because what they were doing was they were waiting for a cloud. Remember now there's a 0.001 mile an hour wind, you know, nothing happening, right? And this cloud is moving in front of the sun ever so slowly. Well, because the light doesn't match the previous scene, they have to wait for the cloud to go away from the sun so that light will match the light that they use in the previous scene. Well, so everybody's sitting here and waiting for the cloud to go away. Ed is laying on the asphalt, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and his skin is cooking. And I thought, well, gosh, it looks, I almost left out. There's a woman with about 4 gallons full of Cairo syrup blood pouring it into my mouth every 10 seconds so that it will ooze correctly. Because now my jaw's been broken, right? By the impact of the truck. And the only way that they could get the jaw to look right was to prop it up with something. Well, in the history of B-grade movies, we don't want to get some kind of expensive $400 mouth joist, so use this flat rock, which is more or less round on most of its edges. And they cram this underneath my jaw like this to give it that look of a broken jaw. So we've got the jaw being protruded through with the rock, we've got the Cairo syrup in the mouth, we've got the 450 degrees Fahrenheit things, and then later I find out they didn't use the scene.
First time we shot, Gunnar and Ed bringing me down the stairs in my rocking chair. We hadn't really tried it out. And I was like, oh, let's go get Grandpa. And then Leatherface and the hitchhiker run up to get Grandpa, and they're carrying me down. And I don't remember who was on the bottom and who was carrying the top, but whoever was on the bottom was moving faster than the person at the top could move, so the chair slanted down. And I was just not supposed to move. I was supposed to be like, you know, zoned out. And I started sliding because the chair was like on a 15-degree incline. So I started sliding, and nobody says anything. Toby doesn't say to cut. Danny Pearl's still shooting. And the guys are still going down the stairs. I keep sliding. Finally, I slide just like, you know, completely out of the chair, and still nobody says anything. So they stop, and whoever, I think it might have been Ed at the bottom, was trying to stuff me back up in the chair, and finally the three of us, the actors, started laughing. And Toby said, cut. He says, you know, print that. I'd like to see it. It'd be good for the outtakes. 10 years from now, we'll get a kick out.
The implication in Chainsaw is one of its strongest things. I have won bet after bet after bet of people who have seen the film once, maybe twice, betting me that you see the hook go through the girl. You do not see the hook go through the girl. But they will, of course you do. The hook goes right through. It was a great shot. You see him setting her down on the hook. But what your mind does is finish the image. It finishes it. You know, it finishes it for you. Your mind does. It's inevitable if you have any imagination whatsoever. And so they'll bet me that, and they also bet me that that you see Paul Partain cut in half in the wheelchair. You never see anything except Leatherface.
We shot that scene with a metal sheath around my leg to keep the chainsaw from cutting into me, and then put taped a stake down and taped a blood bag over that, and then actually cut into that. And they originally, when they told me they were going to do was, when they explained the scene to me, they were going to have one of the crew use the chainsaw on me. And I'm going to fall on a mid-shot, and it cuts to a close-up of the chainsaw cutting into my leg, so they said, well, we'll just have one of the crewmen run the chainsaw. And I said no, that I would run the chainsaw, because I didn't trust them to know, when they were going to cut into me. So we did it, and we used the chainsaw with the teeth cut off, and it didn't work. It wouldn't cut through the pants. So we had to redo it with the teeth on the saw to be able to cut the material. And that shot is very real to me, because when we shot it, the saw cut very quickly through the cloth, the blood bag, the meat, and hit the metal sheath and burned through it. It heated up the metal sheath and burned me. And for a quick instant, I thought I had been hit with the chainsaw, and I let out a yelp and pulled the saw away and grabbed the spot, because I thought I'd been cut, and looked down as this spurt of blood comes up through the bag, through my fingers, from the blood bag, and it was all quite real, and it worked very well. In fact, a friend was on the set for that scene, and she got so cranked up during the scene that when it had been on the set long enough to, I think, pick up some of the lingo, so that when that shot was finished, she yelled out first, "It's a print." And Toby sort of looked up at her and nodded and said, "Yes, that's a print," and we used them.
No, it was hard for me to do, to start. It really was. I just couldn't get into beating somebody with a club, but tried enough, and they keep yelling at you, go ahead, so I really got with it. And then the truck scene followed, and of course that, I don't know why they did that. When we were to rehearse it, there was nothing in the bag. Nobody was in it. But then they wanted to start shooting it. They put a girl in the bag. Yeah, that took a while to get used to banging her, and so it came out all right.
I hope you're not too uncomfortable down there.
And here's where we show just how far this guy will go. He grabs a knife up and he cuts his hand, without, at a moment's notice, Self-mutilization is always intrigued audience people, because as an audience, when you see somebody blown away or shot, or with all of the pyrotechnics that we have at our disposal now, it's just more movie making, because we've been brought up for years and years and years to accept that. But self-mutilization, particularly on a bare arm, you see, it's almost documentary-like, because it's right there in the palm of his hand. There's no cutaway. It's a simple theatrical trick, but still, it looks very immediate and very real, and it's very large, and it's right there in front of the camera.
The guy who did the makeup, Dr. Barnes, I think was his name, was a plastic surgeon. Wasn't really a makeup guy. And he had made 2 masks, liquid latex. And so the first time they put it on, it took them 7 hours to put the makeup on, alone. And then we shot for 12, maybe. And the second time, they only had 1 more mask for me, which they cut up into sections, put on in sections with spirit gum. And so the second time, they wanted to shoot myself and Jim Seedow out, because they couldn't afford to pay Jim anymore, and they didn't have a 3rd makeup mask to use for me. So I was in makeup for, I think, 26 hours. And this was Texas in July. It was really uncomfortable.
They couldn't change my clothes. We had only 1 set of clothes for me. And the shirt had been run through a washing machine with some dye to get it the right color for the film. So we couldn't even wash my shirt because we were afraid, or they were afraid, that the color would change. And we couldn't have the suit dry cleaned because they were afraid that if the dry cleaner lost it or anything happened to it, we would never be able to replace it and get it to match. So I had to wear the same clothes throughout the entire shoot, and that including the shirt. And at that point, we're 3.5 weeks into the shooting, and I know that there was more than one person who did not like to sit next to me when we had dinner because, I think I was pretty right myself.
Yeah, the script was just a bare outline almost. And there's one scene in there that they claim has become famous. Is that, I don't know, that line where I say, "Look what your brother did to the door."
Look what your brother did to that door! Yeah, he got no pride in his home!
It's supposed to be a great historical line in movie making now. That just came about running around there, and so might as well lay it on. So we laid it on. Of course, Ed, Neil, and I, we had the parts to do it with.
I have to admit, unless you have a tremendously good script, unless you have a Kasdan or a Brooks or somebody like that writing you a really good script, I have to admit, if I have my choice, put me out there on that set with no dialogue at all, where it simply says in the script, "Hitchhiker runs up and grabs Sally." Now that's all it says in the script. But, and you could have 100 different guys run up and grab the girl. But my idea was to whip out my razor and instead of grabbing her, trail behind her, whipping with the razor behind her. Instead of catching her, he just cuts her to ribbons.
Earlier in the shooting, when we were shooting the chase scene in the woods, I was wearing, throughout the whole movie, I was wearing cowboy boots, which they had put new heels on so that they were very high to make me taller. I mean, I'm 6'4", and I think with the heels I was something like 6'7". And so I was wearing these boots that had slick leather soles and very high heels. And earlier in the shooting I had fallen. In fact, it's on the film just before that, when I'm running through the woods, and Leatherface does this little skip in the woods. The reason for that is that I was just getting ready to turn. The trail that I was running on turned sharply there. And I figured somehow that my boots were going to dig in, and so I did that quick skip to dig my feet in to make the turn. And when I turned, my feet went out from under me, and I landed on my back, and the chainsaw went up in the air and out of the range of the lights, and I couldn't see anyway very well out of the mask, so I rolled over and covered my head and waited for it to land. And so because of that, and I think the fright we all got from having this running chainsaw land beside me, in the scene where I'm chasing her to the house, the only way I was going to make that turn without falling down was to do that little turn and sort of Keystone Cop sort of skid to make the turn and go around.
I'd end up over at Toby's apartment with Kim in the middle of the night drinking beer, and they were rewriting constantly through the whole thing. And I do remember them one night sitting up and drinking beer and trying to write a scene to get Marilyn's blouse ripped off. Just because everybody was so enamored of her torso, let's say. Which never came across, because believe it or not, Toby was worried about rating, about being able to get it on television. I remember going into the first time I went to see Rush's, and Toby had, it was Danny Pearl who was first camera on it, had him taping off the Steenbeck. And I said to, I guess, Lou Perryman, I was there, I said, why is he doing that? He says, well, we want to see what it's going to look like when they cut it down for TV. I said, well, if he thinks he's going to get this thing on TV, he's nuts.
There were a couple of times when I felt very strange. It was inevitably late at night. It would be like, 2, 3 in the morning. And I'd be sitting there getting made up. And in the still Texas night, you could hear Marilyn screaming. And it was just a real strange kind of, I'd look in the mirror and there was this strange person there with a huge face-long purple-red birthmark on his face and sores all over his face. And I had this big knife and this, screaming, and the sweat and the air was just absolutely still. And then Gunnar would come in from having shot and run back and forth, being a large person, running back and forth for hours, almost physically exhausted. Sweat pouring from every inch of his body. And it became kind of Twilight Zone-ish. Now's my turn to chase her. Now's my turn to do this. And a great many of your actions being based on more or less actions you've never done before. It becomes in your imagination. How do you complete that image in your mind for the camera, for whoever, of what it is they're asking you to do? And it became very unreal at times, and I thought, gosh, as you look down and you see the ropes that you've just tied around a Marilyn Burns, a friend, an actress, but all of a sudden a non-real thing in front of you that you've been asked to jiggle up and down, truss up into an immovable mass, where do you stop? You've been asked to do it as well as you could do it to the highest pitch that you can do it at, and the higher pitch you get it to, you see all the faces of all of the other actors and all of the crew people and the director and the assistant, manager, and they're all there. And the more you do it, the more excited they get in a kind of voyeuristic kind of sense. But when you look down and you see the flesh of the actress separating because the rope is too hard, and there's nothing she can do about it because she's tied in the chair and there's a rag gag in her mouth. There's a little tiny light that goes on in the back that says, hey, wow, we need to back off this sucker or what?
When you're involved with a project like that, particularly if you're visible, like being the killer, you get blamed for a lot of society's problems. So there have been all kinds of complications. I mean, just looking at that complication, a number of years ago, probably in 1975, maybe 76, very shortly after the film had come out, I was at a chamber concert, and during the intermission, this Philadelphia dowager comes up to me and is talking and says, Gunnar, there were 12 people murdered today in New York City, and it's your fault. And you're sort of made speechless by a comment like that. But I think a lot of people think that movies like that are the cause of a lot of problems, when I think they're symptomatic of some societal issues. And to my mind, though I'm no psychologist, probably harmless, or at least let people work through some misery. So I get a lot of that. I'm not a lot, but I get some of that. People who think somehow I'm supposed to feel responsible for, a lot of the misery in this world. And my answer is that the misery is there, and the film simply, uses that misery.
And I think still to this day, it's not that violent a film. There's very little blood and death that happens in it, I think, particularly compared by today's standards, I don't think there was at that time either. I think that the one scene, when I first saw it, I saw it at the Chicago Theater on State Street in Chicago. And the first time I saw it in the theater, and about 20 of us went. We all met there and we had a party afterwards with Bloody Mary's big opening night party for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The big punch bowl filled with Bloody Marys. And the scene where a lot of people got up and that's a big theater, and started walking out, was the scene where Terry McMinn gets hung on the meat hook, which I still think is probably the most violent scene that happens in the film. Because when Paul gets killed, it's all from behind, and, you know, this stuff, but it's all shot from behind. And Bill Dale gets, you know, hit on the head with a sledgehammer and shakes around a little bit, but there's no, you know, the cow entrails with the bag with the, you know, none of that stuff happening.
The way they keep saying it was the forerunner of the modern day horror films, and it led to a lot. And it was great being in on it. They never let you forget about it. Shoot, you could have been in, could have been in Gone with the Wind or something until somebody's in Gone with the Wind. So what? But you mentioned Chainsaw. Oh, the thing still lives on. On and on. Used to get, we used to get calls from all over the country, from England, from Germany, from how they found out where I lived or my number. One time I thought of, after that show came out, of getting an unlisted number, because boy, I was getting calls that were just, man, how did you do that? Man, how did you? I'd ask them, where are you calling from? If it was Houston, I was going to hang up and leave town for a while.
Being that caught up in it, and never, of course, seeing the film as a whole, while we were doing it, being in the middle of it, I don't think we ever really realized what we were making. I mean, I didn't realize it because I was just, you know, some schlep on the set. I wasn't, you know, I didn't have this overview. I didn't know what Toby's notion was or his vision was. So I don't think I ever realized what this film was going to be, or what we were making.
And the thing that helped us a great deal was the 115-degree Texas weather, which by the time you got, you know, a pound and a half of sweat in your eyes and your mouth and your nose and your clothes were all sweaty, and they hadn't been washed in 6 weeks. It got easier and easier and easier as we took all the environmental aspects of the family to become the family. Easier and easier. We were around the kind of food they were eating, we were around the clothes they wore, we were in the smell they were in. I mean, it was in the air. So it became easier and easier and easier.
You act like a pack of hounds. We were just having fun. You think this is a party?
I feel sad that I didn't make any money. Also, in '74, there was, in France, there was a T-shirt going around with my picture on the front of it. You know, I was like a cult hero in France, Grandpa. So the popularity worldwide is unbelievable. And I got a postcard or a picture somebody took in Tokyo of the marquee in front of a, I don't have it anymore, I don't know where it is, but a marquee in front of a theater where, like, Grandpa was the whole thing. This huge picture of Grandpa. You know, so it's not just in this country, worldwide it was a pretty amazing phenomena.
When I read it, I read, well, it's a Class A, B drive-in movie, you know, and I didn't take it too seriously. I didn't even dream the thing would, nobody dreamed the thing would come out like it did. And no, I was just there. I was having a lot of fun doing it, and 'cause really, I didn't have any great expectations. I didn't think it'd even get to be shown, to tell you the truth.
I figured it was one of these movies that, you know, 2 or 3 years from now, there'll be a few horror film freaks who really like this movie because it's gruesome, and that would be it, you know. And it would be right up there with Bucket of Blood, or, you know, one of those. So I really didn't expect anything to happen. Plus, it was more than a year before the film was released. It was released in October of '74, and we shot it, we finished shooting in September. We shot it in August and beginning of September of '73. So we spent a year waiting, and we'd virtually given up. I mean, we thought maybe there never will be a movie, you know, that this is all, you know, it died somewhere. And we were actually a little bit surprised when they got in touch with us and said, we're having this press party in Dallas, will you come up for it? Once the film was released, again, at first, it was just a movie. I mean, we had a party for the screening, for the premiere, which we got into for free because we convinced them that we had been in the movie, you know, and they let us in. And I don't think I realized that this movie was going to have any long-term effects, any lasting effect, until a couple of weeks after the film came out. I went up, I took a friend of mine to show her the house and that we'd shot this stuff in, and we pulled up and walked over to the fence, and we were standing there looking at the house. And this car pulls up and 3 teenagers get out and they walk over to the fence and they're looking at the house too. And one of them turns to me and says, "You know, that's where they made that movie." And I said something like, oh really? You know? And then they got in and drove off. And that's the first inkling I had that this movie was going to affect people.
Well, my life wasn't affected by Chainsaw right away. It was only after it became a cult movie that it began to affect it. And it's, you know, it's like, it's something that you just will live with for the rest of your life. You know, it's not like you can stop being the hitchhiker. You know, it's like, well, I don't want to be the hitchhiker anymore because that's, you know. But it's real interesting because now there are several producers, directors who think, oh, that's all he does is those kind of roles, when that's the only thing of that nature besides Future Kill, which was a direct outgrowth of having been in Chainsaw. You see, I would never have done Future Kill without having done the Chainsaw role, see, because it was offered to me because of the Chainsaw thing. Right? But for example, very few, a lot of casting directors that don't know me, not from the Southwest, because the ones from the Southwest know, but you know, other people from other parts of the country are astonished to find out that I've done you know, ABC TV movies with Mary Hartley. I've got commercials running on World's Greatest Commercials. I have done 3.5 years with a comedy group called Esther's Follies, 6 shows a week, all sold out. You know, he does comedy, you know, that kind of. But wow, you know, it's great, you know. But it's once you get typed, you know, it's very difficult, especially if you do it correctly.
In fact, on Chainsaw 2, people would come by wanting autographs from Chainsaw 1, and fellas that had these huge, beautiful posters that I had never seen before that were made in Germany, in France, in Italy, you know, with our pictures on them, all in German, all in French. I saw one taping of it with Japanese dubbed in. And you think we weren't funny with Japanese dubbed in. Should have shown it that way all the time. Oh, that was funny.
When a friend of mine introduced me to a woman who was very impressed by the fact that I was a movie star, you know, big M, big S, and wanted me to take her to see this movie, and I had, you know, real fantasies about where this was going to go, and of course where it went was to a locked door. I mean, we went to this movie and she was very delightful and excited, and I was all pumped up thinking this was going to be great, and we went to this movie, and I think, as I put it in the article, she was curiously silent on the way home, and was not very talkative, and as we walked to the door said, "Thank you, I had a nice time," stepped through the door and slammed it in my face. And I think at that point I realized that I wasn't going to capitalize on this movie.
Sally, I hear something. Stop! Stop!
It's always amazement for one thing, because I play a role that, for one thing, it's usually disbelief, because it's like, yeah, anybody could say they played Grandpa, you know, with all the makeup and everything. And then once they're convinced, it's just amazed or admired. There's a guy that I just started working with, a new waiter, that they just hired like 3 days ago, who overheard me talking to one of the other waiters about you guys coming to talk to me, who said, "Are you serious? You were really in Texas Chainsaw Massacre?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That is my all-time favorite movie of ever," you know. I started asking me all these questions, pumped me for questions for like an hour, you know, so I get a lot of admiration. There are a lot of people who just think it's wonderful, you know, and don't understand why I'm not a multimillionaire.
I think the popularity of Chainsaw is perhaps deserved because it was a creative effort on a great many people's parts, from the production manager and the editor and the cinematographer and the director and the script writer and the actors and the crew people. I think it was, you know, because you got to do more things on a set like this than you could ever even begin to discuss on a regular feature film. You know, you had crew members doing jobs, you know, there's a great deal of crossover, you know. And so you get to suggest things. Grips could suggest the lining up of a shot. You know, you can't do that on a regular feature film. If you did that in Hollywood, they'd send two guys out to take your kneecaps off and have them roasted for lunch. You know, that kind of thing. But so you have all this creative energy and all of these ideas and all of this stuff flowing together. And because there wasn't a big, long background of this is the way we make movies, see? There wasn't a lot of the cliches in there that you usually see. There was some very ingenious working out of shot angles. It was a very learn by doing kind of thing. So you get this kind of documentary type style filmmaking because that's the only way they could figure out how to do it. So it looks very, you know, handheldish, very, gee, they had a TV camera out there that day shooting this weird family. It takes on a very, and you have actors that are taking chances because there's nobody telling them not to. There's nobody saying, that's too much for the screen, you know. So its popularity is based a great deal on seeing things that you haven't seen before. These characters are much more interesting, I find, much more real than the characters in Psycho. I mean, 3/4 of the characters in Psycho, the original Psycho, are cardboardish. You you got the woman, the people at the restaurant. You know what I mean? They're just your regular stock people. We don't care what happens to these people. These people aren't interesting. You know, Anthony Perkins' character was kind of interesting because he's not doing the same old stuff, and he was doing a great job in acting. But you know, but outside of that. But the popularity, the chance, I've seen people watch it that say, which is interesting to me, is, ooh, that's my favorite horror film, and I don't usually like horror films. I hear that over and over and over across the country, East Coast, West Coast, Florida, you know, all over the place. And what that says to me is that it wasn't made like a typical horror film, and there's something immediate there that these people are picking up on, see? That isn't there in Blood Feast, you see? Blood Feast, there's things, you know, the Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff, which is, you know, interesting and fun and campy, but it's not real, you know. It's not real like Chainsaw is real. Chainsaw is one of the only real horror movies ever made.
I don't know if they'll have another one or not, but no, I'd keep playing it, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course, see, I can do all kinds of characters. I don't want to be stereotyped as that type of character. Really, I'm a lover.
It won't hurt none. My old grandpa's the best killer there ever was.
The other side effects, as far as the negative side effects of my life, I suppose, are the fact that a lot of people think chainsaw jokes are funny. And believe me, after 15 years, chainsaw jokes are not funny. And I still get chainsaw jokes. I still get people coming up to me in bars making chainsaw noises, or, you know, or calling me up at night and saying, you know, I want to talk about this movie, when they won't even tell me who they are. And I think that's sort of silly. A lot of people also think that I am the personality of Leatherface, that I am brutish, you know, that I'm you know, nasty, brutish, and tall, and that somehow all I did was call upon my inner self to, you know, and bring that to the surface to make this character, and that I'm some horrible creature, and, you know, and that they're not going to let their children come to my door on Halloween.
You know, I got about 20 minutes on camera there, at least. Don't say a thing. Don't do a whole hell of a lot. But I do it well. I do it very well. Sort of like now. My life, I don't do a lot, but I do. It's quality.
But it really isn't the biggest thing in my life. So I guess it's because people think that if you do something you're well known for, that fame is what defines what's important to you. I mean, I don't know how to say that well, but that if you do something that people recognize you for, that whatever you do after that that's not public can't be as important. And I think that's unfortunate because that's not the case. I mean, doing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was certainly not the biggest thing in my life, either personally or professionally. And I'm glad I did it, but I don't want it to be the center of my life, and I think it is for a lot of people. I mean, people always bring that up as somehow the big thing, and to me, I think it's unfortunate that I'll probably be remembered for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre before I'll be remembered for anything else, and I think that's really unfortunate. It will probably say Gunnar Hansen, he was Leatherface, on my gravestone.
You know, I didn't see the Chainsaw Massacre the first time round, often out of the country, and by the time I got back it was gone, so I had to wait 4 or 5 years till I had a revival of it here on Hollywood Boulevard. So by then it had become kind of a cult classic, and since I've seen everything of this nature since I was 5.5 years old back in 1922, I thought it was high time that I catch up with it. Well, I must say I was staggered by what I saw on the screen. It was so realistically done that it seemed more like a documentary somehow or other to me than a film of fiction. I think it was probably a watershed work in that it brought a new dimension of reality to horror films. I say it, to me it seemed as though it was really happening in that house and with the mad executioner and so on, and I think many films that have come on since have used that as kind of a blueprint for horror.